Have you ever had one of those days when you feel absolutely exhausted, but when you think about what you've actually done, you can't really understand why you're so exhausted? Maybe you've spent an hour talking to somebody. Perhaps you've had an appointment. Maybe you've been worrying about something that's coming up in your life. Or perhaps you've spent most of the day at home, and physically at least, you really haven't done very much. But yet your energy feels completely depleted. If you're living with chronic fatigue, that can be incredibly frustrating, because when energy is precious, it's very natural to start measuring what you're doing physically. How much have I walked today? How long have I been out? Have I done too much? Did I get enough sleep? Have I rested enough? And all of these things matter. But there is another question that I think we sometimes forget to ask. And that question is, what else have I been carrying today? Because your physical body isn't the only thing using energy. Perhaps you've had the experience of spending time with somebody and coming away feeling completely drained by the experience. You might have been sitting in a chair the whole time. You haven't walked very far, you haven't lifted anything, you haven't done anything that you'd normally think of as physically demanding. But then on the other hand, perhaps you were choosing your words more carefully. Maybe you didn't feel completely comfortable and relaxed. Perhaps you were trying not to upset the other person. Maybe you were listening to something difficult. Or perhaps there was something that you really wanted to say but didn't. And afterwards, you feel exhausted. Now compare that with spending the same amount of time with somebody you can feel completely comfortable with, somebody you don't have to explain yourself to, someone you can be quiet with, someone around whom you can simply be yourself. You may have spent exactly the same amount of time talking. You may have done exactly the same amount physically, and yet somehow you can leave those two sets of conversations feeling quite different. Sometimes you might feel a little more restored with the second conversation than perhaps when you first arrived. So if the physical activity was roughly the same, what was different? There's another example that I hear quite often. If, for example, you know that you've got an appointment or a difficult conversation coming up later in the day, and your mind keeps returning to it with questions like, what am I going to say? What's going to happen? How am I going to manage it? What if they say this? What if they say that? What if I run out of energy or feel unwell while I'm in there? Maybe you take time to rehearse the conversation. Perhaps you think about all the different possibilities, the way the conversation might go. Maybe you're trying to work out how you'll manage your energy around it. And then the appointment happens. Might only last a short period of time, might last a bit longer. But you've actually been carrying that appointment since you woke up in the morning. Maybe even for a few days beforehand. And when it's all over, you realise that the lead up to it, the anticipation, seemed to have used up more energy than the actual thing itself. Again, very little of that would show up if we were only measuring physical activity. But that doesn't mean that it hasn't asked something of you. Here's another one that you might recognize. Someone asks you to do something, and before you've really had a chance to think about it, you hear yourself saying, "Oh yes, that's fine." But actually, you didn't want to say yes. Maybe you were already tired. Perhaps you didn't really feel like you had the capacity to take that thing on. Or maybe it was something that you simply didn't want to do. But you said yes anyway because you're a kind, caring, compassionate person. And sometimes when we say that yes, we can almost feel our energy sinking as the words come out of our mouth. Absolutely nothing physical has happened yet. You haven't done the whatever it was you've been asked to do, but something has already changed in your experience of energy. And I think that these very ordinary examples tell us something important. When I talk about energy with the women I work with, I find it helpful to think beyond physical energy alone. There's the energy that we're using mentally, the energy involved in thinking, planning, remembering, anticipating, making decisions. Then there's emotional energy. There's energy involved in our relationships and social interactions. And there's also something about the energy we experience when we're able to do things that really matter to us, when we feel engaged with our lives and kind of connected with who we are. Now, I'm not suggesting that we now need to start measuring all of those things as well, because the last thing I want to give you is another energy monitoring exercise. I'm simply suggesting that this is about widening the picture that we have of our energy. Because if you're only looking at what you've done physically, then there may be days when your exhaustion seems to make absolutely no sense whatsoever. You might look back and think, but I haven't done anything today. When actually, maybe you've been worrying, or you've been planning, or maybe making decisions, or maybe managing somebody else's emotions. Maybe you've been trying not to disappoint someone, or you've been preparing yourself for something difficult. Maybe you've been having a conversation in your head 20 times before you've been having it in real life. Maybe you've been carrying uncertainty. Now, none of these things necessarily involve much physical movement. But that doesn't mean that they're asking nothing of you, your energy. So if you reach the end of a day and find yourself thinking, "Why am I so tired? I haven't done anything," I'd like to invite you to perhaps pause before you criticize yourself and judge how badly your body's performing, and perhaps ask yourself, what have I been carrying today? Not so that you can spend ages analysing everything, and certainly not so that you can create another list of things that you now need to avoid because they might use energy. I'm asking you simply to notice. Notice whether perhaps there was something on your mind. Perhaps you spent time with somebody who required a lot from you. Perhaps there was a decision hanging over you. Perhaps you spent all day trying to make sure that you don't do too much. Or perhaps nothing particularly obvious comes to mind. That's okay too. This question isn't about finding the right answer. It's simply about recognizing that what you've physically done is only one part of your whole experience of energy. And just recognizing that can be quite a relief, because your exhaustion isn't as inexplicable as it sometimes feels. Perhaps there's more going on underneath than you've been accounting for. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "I don't understand why I'm exhausted, I haven't done anything," see what happens if you gently add, "But what have I been carrying?" You don't need to change anything with the answer. Just becoming curious is enough. Because once we start noticing where our energy might actually be going, another interesting question begins to appear. What has my attention been trying to manage for me? But that's a conversation for another day.